Ruth. In a world searching for meaning, few texts have shaped history, hearts, and human identity like the Bible. But beyond the verses and chapters lies a story, ancient, eternal, and alive. Welcome to Speed Reads, where we journey book by book through Scripture, not in fragments, but as sweeping narratives rich with depth, drama, and divine design. Whether you're rediscovering these sacred texts or exploring them for the first time, each episode brings you closer to the heartbeat of the Bible, one book at a time. The Book of Ruth stands as a beautiful testament to loyalty, love, and redemption. It is one of the shortest books in the Bible, but one of the richest in meaning. Set during the time of the Judges, when Israel was in a state of spiritual and moral decline, Ruth presents a story of steadfast faith in the midst of hardship, and it beautifully showcases God's providence working through human choices. The story begins with a family living in Bethlehem, the town that will later be famous as the birthplace of Jesus Christ. This family is headed by Elimelech, whose name means God is my king. He and his wife Naomi have two sons. Due to a severe famine in the land of Israel, the family decides to leave Bethlehem and move to Moab, a neighboring country, in search of food. Moab, however, is a land historically hostile to Israel, as the Moabites were descendants of Lot, and the relationship between the two nations was often tense. While in Moab, Elimelech dies, leaving Naomi a widow. Her two sons marry Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. After about 10 years, both sons die, leaving Naomi with no husband and no children. In this period of tragedy and loss, Naomi hears that the famine in Israel has ended, and she decides to return to Bethlehem. She encourages her daughters-in-law to stay in Moab and return to their families, as she believes she cannot offer them any hope or future. Orpah reluctantly agrees and returns to her family, but Ruth, despite being urged by Naomi to leave, clings to Naomi in an act of remarkable loyalty. Ruth's declaration to Naomi is one of the most beautiful and faithful statements in the Bible. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Ruth's words demonstrate her deep commitment to Naomi, but even more so, they show her commitment to the God of Israel. This declaration of faith is pivotal, as it sets the course for the rest of the story. When they arrive in Bethlehem, Naomi is greeted by the people, but she is deeply sorrowful, feeling as though God has dealt bitterly with her. She changes her name to Mara, meaning bitter, to reflect the pain and loss she has experienced. Ruth, however, begins to take action to provide for Naomi. In accordance with Jewish law, Ruth goes to glean in the fields during the barley harvest. Gleaning was a practice where the poor and widows could collect leftover grain from the fields after the main harvesters had taken what they needed. By God's providence, Ruth ends up gleaning in the field of Boaz, a wealthy and respected man from Bethlehem, who happens to be a relative of Naomi's deceased husband. Boaz notices Ruth's work ethic and kindness toward Naomi, and he goes out of his way to ensure that she is protected and treated well. He gives instructions to his workers to allow her to gather grain freely, even leaving extra for her to collect. This kindness from Boaz does not go unnoticed by Ruth, and she expresses her gratitude to him for his generosity. Naomi, upon hearing of Boaz's kindness, realizes that he is a kinsman-redeemer, a close relative who has the legal right to redeem the family's property and marry a widow to ensure the continuation of the family line. Naomi encourages Ruth to take bold action and approach Boaz in a culturally appropriate way. She instructs Ruth to go to Boaz's threshing floor at night after the harvest celebration and lie at his feet. This act, though unconventional, is understood as a humble request for Boaz to take on the role of redeemer. Ruth follows Naomi's advice, and Boaz is moved by her action. In the middle of the night, he wakes up to find Ruth lying at his feet. Ruth asks him to spread his cloak over her, symbolizing that she is asking for his protection and for him to fulfill the role of a kinsman-redeemer. Boaz is deeply honored by Ruth's request and assures her that he will do what is required. However, there is a closer relative who has the first right of redemption, so Boaz promises to settle the matter the next day. The following day, Boaz goes to the city gate, where legal matters were settled. He meets with the closer relative and offers him the opportunity to redeem the land and marry Ruth. The relative, upon learning that he must also marry Ruth and raise up an heir for her deceased husband, declines, fearing it would affect his own inheritance. Boaz therefore steps in and formally redeems the property, marrying Ruth, and ensuring that her deceased husband's name and line are carried on. Ruth and Boaz's union is blessed by God, and they have a son named Obed, who becomes the grandfather of King David, placing Ruth in the ancestral line of Jesus Christ. The Book of Ruth ends with a genealogical record, highlighting how God used this story of love, loss, and redemption to bring about his plan of salvation for Israel and, ultimately, for the world. The story of Ruth is not just a beautiful narrative of love and redemption, but also a profound example of God's providence. Even in the midst of personal tragedy, God is at work, weaving together the lives of his people to fulfill his divine purposes. Ruth, a Moabite woman, is included in the lineage of Israel's greatest king, and through her, God's redemptive plan continues to unfold. Ruth's loyalty to Naomi, her commitment to God, and her obedience to the instructions of her mother-in-law stand as shining examples of faithfulness, even when circumstances seem bleak. The Book of Ruth shows how God honors such faithfulness and how his grace can extend to the most unexpected people. The Book of Ruth also reveals God's heart for the marginalized and the outsiders. Ruth, a foreigner, is accepted and embraced by the people of Israel. She becomes part of the family of God, not because of her heritage, but because of her faith in the God of Israel. This inclusion foreshadows the inclusion of the Gentiles into the family of God through the work of Jesus Christ. Thank you for joining this deep dive into the living story of Scripture. As we move through each book, remember these ancient words are not just history, they're mirrors, windows, and signposts, pointing us to something greater. If this journey stirred something in you, subscribe to Speed Reads and walk with us through every chapter of God's unfolding masterpiece. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and keep reading the words slowly or quickly.